Hello, good evening. Welcome to Introduction to Gender Studies. My name is Rachel Hanson. Um, I've been your instructor these past few weeks, and I'm looking forward to continuing in that self appointed role here in Intro to Gender Studies over the next few weeks. Somehow, and I think this is just as shocking to me as it is to anybody else, we're halfway through already. So, uh, we're going to start in a little bit slower tonight. Um, how's it going? It's been it's been a rough week, hasn't it? Um, and from a United States perspective, all of the uh, showboating, and I would say violent showboating, and really just truly ridiculous medical misinformation. It's been a lot to sit with. Um, and then, of course, am I sure? I don't know that I am, but um, I'm relatively sure that folks who have been impacted by the federal government shutdown that started today um, are here among us. And I mean, honestly, what a mess. I think that that's really all I can say uh, here in the moment because words just fail. And the absolute depth of feeling that I have over the failure of my government to govern at all. Um, Now, I might not agree, indeed, with any of the policies that our Republican elected officials have proposed. But the fact is, they ran to govern and they are failing to do that in any way. And that is ridiculous and infuriating. Um, so if you are feeling that way with me, I'm glad that we're in this together and I'm glad that we can kind of create this space of kind of well meaning and sustainable activism that's going to create the world that we are interested in living in. Now, as is often the case, as you're joining, I am glad that you're here. And I welcome your questions and your comments. If you ever see me kind of looking down like this, it is because I'm just looking to see if there are any comments coming in. So I'm here for that. What I am not here for this week or really any other week are any comments on my appearance. You know what I look like. I also am aware of what I look like. So if that's your only comment, just do everybody a favor and keep it to yourself. Because, yeah, none of us are really here for that. Now, last week I had forgotten my water, and that was a terrible mistake. So, hydrated for our class tonight, and I'm very grateful for that. Um, Now, this week's module is, generally speaking, about like showing up authentically and also about academic concepts like compulsory, I have a hard time saying that word, compulsory heterosexuality, LGBTQ history, um, and also the gay agenda. So I think it's going to be a fun night. I'm really excited to talk with all of you about this. Now, the module this week, if you've already read it, you may have noticed Um, it maybe feels a little messier than the previous few weeks. Um, Now, the reason for that is that the first few modules um, I wrote and researched over the summer and gave a ton of time. This module, I actually finished writing it on Sunday night for publication on Monday morning. So uh, yeah, the research was happening, but life also was happening. So it seems a little messier. I still think it's really good and I'm proud of it, but that's why. But I also, not that I did this on purpose, but I do think that it's appropriate that with these topics that we're covering, that this module is maybe a little bit more authentic to me as a human and as an instructor. Um, because authenticity really is, in my opinion, at the core of all of these concepts. Um, and really kind of having that level of self reflection is key to what we've been talking about this entire semester. Um, because it's important to show up authentically. But what might feel authentic to you might also be something that um, is a norm in society. And you might be going, well, I don't really love society as a whole, but um, right, like I shared in the first week, I took my husband's last name when we got married, and I had a lot of guilt around that, which is a little bit weird. And also, I knew myself well enough to know uh, that kind of two things, right? When we had children, because that was part of the plan, and thankfully it's part of the plan that worked out, that they would have their dad's last name, and that it would drive me crazy if people were calling me Mrs. Hanson if that was not my actual legal name. So that was a decision that felt authentic to me. Um, and I kind of got guilted about it by my professors. That wasn't great. Um, but, kind of checking in with this kind of thing, right? How are you doing? Um, Talking about how you're feeling, being able to name why you make decisions. That really is what all of this is about. Now, the first concept this evening that we're going to be discussing is compulsory heterosexuality. Now, a couple of weeks ago, you might remember that we discussed the ways that we both consciously and unconsciously perform our gender identity. Clothing is one example, of course, but performance goes beyond that. And I'm sure that you will remember from our conversation again a few weeks ago. Um, and that's where this is really coming in, right? Judith Butler reminds us that gender is a performance that relies on recognition from others. Uh, and it's the social validation that really provides kind of a sense of safety, right? Um, which, so then when we're talking about compulsory heterosexuality, which is a concept that was coined by Adrienne Rich in the 1980s, uh, she really argues that society is structured in a solipsistic way. And I'll be coming back to that word in a second because it's not one we use in regular everyday life. Um, and in that solipsistic fashion, heterosexuality is really positioned as the only path to both social and material safety. Um, and historically, right, that has been relatively true, unfortunately. Um, because at best, being homosexual or attracted to somebody who is the same sex as you, and again, of course, we're kind of boiling this down into a binary when maybe a binary doesn't exist, but just kind of for the simplicity of the conversation here, um, that homosexuality means at best like instability in your life, especially as as a woman, right? Because you wouldn't have access to employment or money or really like any kind of resource, right? If you didn't have a man that was attached to you. Um, and in a lot of ways, also loss of community. Now, less true for women than for men, um, right? Because living in the patriarchy, as it is presently structured, having feelings and expressing them weirdly is um, not generally considered to be manly. Um, and so there are times, right, when um, men might feel that loss of community, which is not really what we're going for here, right? Um, now, there have been times when those two things, right, instability and loss of community, are best case scenarios. That's pretty grim, right? But at worst, um, across history and over time, homosexuality could mean torture or death. Um, and so, right, like when those are your choices in the society that you live in, uh, showing up authentically as yourself may not uh, be the right choice. In which case, heterosexuality then becomes compulsory because uh, it's the only way to kind of have a modicum of safety in the society that you're living in. Now, I said that I was going to come back to the word solipsistic, um, and here we are. We've arrived. um, Now, solipsism really describes an inward and self-centered worldview. Um, so when Rich is calling the society solipsistic, how I interpret that is her critique that what we often accept as common sense is in fact shaped by our privilege, both racial, cultural, economic, and sexual privilege. And it's then imposed on us as universal truth. When really, when it comes to ways of being, the only universally thing, the only thing that I think should be universally true is that you're not harming others. Otherwise, pretty much anything is fair game. And there's nothing universal about that human experience, right? We're all showing up in ways that are authentic to ourselves, and then we should live in a society um, that has the space to like celebrate that and to enjoy it. Uh, I was just looking to see any comments, and there's none yet. So now, one figure that I chose for this module that really illustrates how common sense, right, isn't common at all is LGBTQ icon Sylvia Rivera. Now, I linked to the podcast episode that I'm going to be referring to in the written module for this week. Actually, the same is true for compulsory heterosexuality as well. So I would encourage you to read those slash listen to them. But the interview with Sylvia that I chose really offers us some insight into how perceptions of sexuality shape our lives. Um, Now, at the time of the interview, again, that I linked to, Sylvia was going by Ray and was a central activist in the LGBTQ civil rights movement in the 1960s and 70s. Um, it is possible, has been debated by some, um, that she was present on the first night of the Stonewall riots in 1969. Uh, if you are not familiar with the Stonewall riots, um, kind of as a brief segue before we go back to Sylvia, um, the Stonewall Bar was well known, um, as they were well known as a gay bar in the 1960s in New York City. Now, there was a lot of bribery that was going on, right? Because it was not actually legal to be out and queer in public at the time. Uh, because of this bribery system with New York City police and with the mob, um, our LGBTQ brothers and sisters faced a lot of abuse at the hands of law enforcement and also gang violence, which I think we can all agree is not ideal, right? Um, and after years of really kind of terrible treatment, a riot broke out, and really is kind of pinpointed into history as a moment in time when um, LGBTQ rights and their civil rights were really brought to the forefront as part of a larger civil rights movement in the United States. So that's what that is all about. Now, Sylvia noted in her interview um, that, of course, she was out, she was trans, and really dressed like a queen, like a drag queen, uh, that the community was embarrassed by them, right? Um, because they didn't quite fit into the mold, right? And those are again like not my words; those are Sylvia's own words. Um, but it really was their uh, super fabulous appearance that made the community visible. And in their interview, Sylvia said, I refuse to pass. Um, as an aside, one thing that I thought was really interesting that Sylvia talked about was when she went to Stonewall, she went in a suit that she had sewn herself. Um, this is not necessarily something that I'm an expert on, but still I'm learning all the time. Um, but handmade clothes, absolutely a thing in the drag community. And if you want to learn a little bit more about that, this documentary is somewhat dated at this point, but you can watch Paris is Burning on YouTube. It's quite good. Um, it can be a hard thing to watch if it's not something you're used to watching, but I would highly recommend it. Um, now, excuse me. Of course, Sylvia was an icon. She was absolutely wonderful, but part of the reason that I chose her to talk about in this module was not just for her activism and her visibility in the community, um, but also because Sylvia reminds us that our heroes are human. Sylvia lived through intense hardship. Um, sorry, it is a little rough. Um, now, Sylvia was mostly raised by her grandmother, um, initially as a grandson, but that was not true to who Sylvia was as a person. Um, and she knew that that was going to make life really difficult for her grandmother. So she left home at 11 and worked the streets, and struggled with homelessness and addiction throughout her life. Now, one thing that I think about when I think about Sylvia, those who were with her, in that time period, um, and those that came after her, right? Because as a reminder, trans youth are the most likely to be homeless of any demographic, excuse me, any demographic of youth. That's devastating. Um, and I can't help but think about what it would be like if we really lived in a society that was built on love, acceptance, um, and also this is from last week, um, the embracing of erotic power. Stories like Sylvia might be less marked by loss and struggle and more marked by liberation. Well, before moving on to right, kind of the last, um, oh, hey, Clyde. Moving before we move on to the last piece of content for this evening, one thing that I want to touch on a little bit is actually my comments on struggle. Because of course Sylvia had so much loss in her life and a tremendous amount of struggle. And I think that it is so important for us, and I'm going to say, especially people that look like me. So if you're watching this later and you're going, oh, what's my responsibility here? Um, Perk up your ears a little bit. The struggle is critical. Um, and the struggle is critical, especially for those of us who uh, benefit from living in a social system that privileges people that look like us, right? Um, there are those, there are so many of those who really do struggle on a regular basis. Not because of anything that they have done or any choices that they have made, but because they live in a society that is designed to disenfranchise certain groups of people. And so when I'm talking about the struggle, Sylvia should not have struggled in that way. She shouldn't have felt like she had to leave home at 11. But because she and people like her um, do feel that way, it's up to us to take on that struggle. It's for us to wrangle with and to land on the side of love and acceptance so that Sylvia and children like her don't have to struggle. That's not the kind of struggle that is worthwhile. The struggle to transform ourselves. And there's a bunch of different faith based and like secular philosophies that can line up with that, um, that talk about turning inward and improving yourself before you look outward. That was a little rambly. I hope it made sense. Now, the last thing that I really want to make sure that we're talking about this evening is the myth of the gay agenda. Because the vision of love and authenticity that um, I struggle to describe, but I still think is critically important, um, really connects in super well with Elsie Granderson's TED Talk, The Myth of the Gay Agenda. Now, Elsie talks about being a young person still living at home with his parents, where he was notably not kicked out, and that's good news. um, talking about seeing the film Porch Song Trilogy. Well, this is not a film that I have seen, but after watching this TED Talk, it definitely is a film that I would like to see. Um, so that'll be great. That'll be a good one to see at some point here. Um, but Granderson recalls a quote from uh, from that film. He says, "There's nothing I need from anyone except for love and respect. And anyone who can't give me those two things has no place in my life." Now, prior to this, the character that made that statement was talking about how he built a life where he was extremely competent to take care of himself. And I think that that is so important for a variety of reasons. Um, but people really don't have a place in our lives if they can't show us basic human decency. Um, Now, in his TED Talk, Granderson really critiques the narrative that is especially prominent in conservative media, that LGBTQ people have a hidden agenda to corrupt society. Um, and he goes on to talk about what he thinks this secret gay agenda might be. Um, and he doesn't. I think sometimes I'm a little too serious for my own good. He does a really great job of um, delivering a very serious message in kind of a funny way, and I appreciate that and admire him for it. Mhm. Now, it may be true that the LGBTQ community has some kind of hidden agenda. Um, but as we've talked about these last weeks, we do generally live in a society that is not loving or accepting. So, frankly, I don't see that it's necessarily a bad thing that that is corrupted, um, so that we have the opportunity to build a society um, that, again, is built on love, authenticity, and dignity. Um, so, really, as we're kind of going through it, compulsory heterosexuality doesn't serve anyone, right? It can give us temporary safety and the possibility of material well being. And we are living in late stage capitalism, so I don't want to discount those things. But ultimately, as Granderson notes, we all deserve to be, quote, gay, being happy. And that, I think, is the kind of agenda that's worth supporting. Um, Now, I was debating going off the rails a little bit here, but um, really, I think kind of just closing out this week's this week's module, um, and some things that I really hope that you will think about. Um, Very specifically, how has thinking about gender performance and your sexuality really shown up in your day to day life? Um, and as always, if you have questions, you can always ask them in the written module too. Um, totally am here for that. Just on kind of a personal note here, I wanted to just share something that I'm kind of excited about. Uh, but giving a little bit of context, not that long ago, I redid the Meyer or not the Myers Briggs. I'm so sorry. The Strengths Finder assessment, my number one value almost every single time is context. Um, and so if you're ever going, oh my gosh, Rachel, what are you doing? You're giving too much context. Um, that's something that you kind of just have to take with me. Uh, Earlier this year, my last grandparent passed away, and for a variety of reasons, right? That was really hard for me. Um, One of the reasons that it was hard for me is I traveled to Utah for her funeral, for my grandma's funeral. And I'm not saying that I've done incredible work, but I have done a lot of work really trying to decolonize myself, and to be actively anti racist. Like, that's extremely important to me. And also, my family colonized Utah. I mean, not just my family, obviously, but um, so going back to Utah, it was hard. It was really hard. Um, and I was finishing my graduate certificate at the time. My professor, just an absolute queen. I love her. Uh, when I came back and I was jumping back into my class, she told me about this new series. It's a mini series on Netflix called American Primeval. Um, it's quite violent. I would still recommend it. And it's about really the colonizing of Utah, and the conflict between, of course, the people indigenous to the area, also the U.S. government, also the Mormons. Anyway, my professor told me about this show. She said, I want you to watch this show and I want you to write a paper about it. And so that's what I did. I'm still trying to find a home, um, for the paper to be published. Um, but one of the things that I decided I wanted to do this year was to teach a live workshop. And so I am teaching a live workshop based on my paper, at a conference next week, and I'm really excited about it. Um, I'm excited about it. Does that mean that I can remember what it's called? Mm, No, that would be silly. But I am gonna look it up because, um, frankly, because I want to tell you. So the name of the workshop itself is Politics of Location and Pedagogies of Power: Feminist Engagements with Technology, Media, and the Mythic West. Um, so I guess I might put this as a poll in next week's module, but I would be curious, after I give this workshop live at the conference, um, if that's something that would be of interest, as maybe like a live webinar or something like that. Um, because yeah, I think it would be really fun and interesting to talk about, but also maybe it would be boring. I don't know. But that's something that's coming up that I'm really excited about. Um, with all of this, thank you so much for joining me this week. Um, this is a really difficult topic, and it's a heavy topic on top of a week that was already honestly pretty dang heavy. Um, so I'm really glad that you took the time to be here with me, and to engage in this content. And I hope that you have a wonderful week. I will see you next Wednesday. Bye.